Good morning, everybody. Assuming that you're listening to this in the morning. If you're not, good day or good evening. But we're back, regardless. Back on track, releasing this sucker on a Monday morning. I'm going to try to get back on that consistent schedule of Mondays. I have a little bit of travel coming up here. I'm going to be at the ATA, which I think stands for the Archery Trade Show, I'm going to assume, of America. I probably just murdered that, but I'll be at the ATA in Indianapolis this week, actually. And then 2 weeks from then, I'll be at SHOT Show. And I know for a fact at SHOT Show, I'm going to have the chance to sit down with a bunch of people, most of which from a tactical background. And I will get the chance to chat with them about them and their life and their experiences and their beliefs. So we'll get some interviews up and running shortly. But until then, today, I'm going to answer a question that I got from the internet. And it is about the ethics of hunting, or my thoughts on the ethics of hunting. I'm not going to really get into it yet because the rest of the episode is dedicated to it. But what I will say, and what I always try to be honest about, is my experience. So I don't know much about hunting, but I do feel strongly about ethics. And not always, but sometimes, I try to be very cautious about what I say. I don't really govern myself that much, but I'm selective with some of the words that I use just based off of how I personally digest information. And I find that if somebody has an argument that's too far to the extreme, it doesn't really resonate with me. It's kind of one in one ear and out the other. I like people who are a little bit more in the middle, not necessarily in their beliefs, but let's just call it in their delivery. And so oftentimes when I'm talking about topics, I'll be selective with the words that I use because I want to try to keep it a little bit more moderate. So the information will actually be not only delivered, but listened to. And I'm not saying that didn't happen in this podcast. I'm just saying that I was pretty clear about what I believe, and I don't expect you to believe what I believe. So we'll just end this intro with a disclaimer, or a spoiler alert, if you will. And that spoiler alert is this. If you're a pussy, this one might sting a little bit, but don't take it personal. Here we go.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
Here we go. Here is our question for today. Hunting is a big part of your life, as well as service to this country. Could you please share your thoughts on the ethics of hunting? There are those who feel hunting is unethical. We do not need to kill wild animals anymore for food. Also, animals do not shoot back, and some of my friends think that hunting is cowardly and unfair. Not a two-way range. You're in a unique position to lead this discussion because you know all about the two-way range. I ask for myself as I have loved the idea of hunting and being in the outdoors, but I have a soft spot for animals. There's a lot of meat on that bone. So let's start at the top and see if we can work our way through this. First and foremost, I try to say this every time I talk about either myself or just my experience in general, whether it be in hunting or in the military. I try to be honest about where I am and where I'm coming from. In saying that, I'm extremely new to hunting. I started hunting in August of 2017, so I have one season under my belt. And my point in bringing that up is that I would not call myself a hunter, even though I've been hunting. Just because you throw somebody into a pool and they're able to claw their way to the side, treading water, nearly drowning, but they don't die, doesn't make them a swimmer. And I feel like calling myself a hunter at this point where I am experientially or experience-wise is disrespectful to people like John Dudley and Remy Warren and Steve Rinella and Cam Haines and the people who not only do it for a living, but do it at an extremely high level. we're doing the same thing, but they're playing a different sport. I have a very low experience level, but I still will speak on what my thoughts are on the ethics of hunting, because it's something that I plan to do for the rest of my life. And I have every desire and aspiration and intention of developing the skill and experience that all the people that I listed have right now. I'm just not at that point currently. To be honest, the phrase that sticks out at me the most from that short paragraph of a question, and this is probably more of a personal issue than anything else, is where it says that hunting is cowardly and unfair. And it bothers me because I think we should be very careful with the terms that we use. So let's talk about cowardice real quick. And if we're going to talk about cowardice, we have to talk about bravery as well, because they are opposite sides of the same coin. So let's define some terms so we know exactly what we're talking about. Bravery is, in my mind, an incredibly overused term. And most often I hear the term used in situations involving emergencies and very often involving guns. And there's a phrase that I like, and I don't know if it's necessarily associated with the Marines, but it's, in essence, there will always be people who run to the sound of the guns. Now, in that's not a description of bravery in and of itself. It's a description of a type of individual that will go towards adversity, that will do the right thing in the moment. And in that phrase, running towards the sound of the guns, there is no asterisk that says, or small writing in the legal print at the bottom that says, when armed. And my point in saying that is that bravery is about doing the right thing, regardless of the situation and the outside influence. Most often, in my opinion, for the benefit of others. It has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with what is in your hands. A gun is a tool. That's it. It doesn't change who you are. And the two-way range, what that really does, in my opinion, is it lays bare and exposes who you really are. There's nowhere to hide. If you are unfortunate enough to find yourself in that situation, there is nowhere to hide. And I don't mean from others, because it's very possible to be in that situation and nobody will see what your actions are, but you can't hide it from yourself. Cowardice, in my opinion, is the opposite of that. The unwillingness or the perceived inability to do the things I just talked about. To do the right thing, regardless of the situation and the outside influence. People put a lot of emphasis on this two-way range, a gunfight, because most people don't understand it, and that's a good thing. And the reality is that most people will never find themselves in that situation, and that's okay, because that's not the only environment where doing the right thing presents itself. If you're a police officer, a firefighter, an emergency response personnel, a businessman, woman, parent, whatever it may be, all of those environments are going to have situations where you are required to act. Every occupation is going to have something like this. I'm obviously not familiar with them all, so I can't give examples of them all. But for those people who live it in whatever that occupation may be, I have no doubt that you know what they are. Let's call it a shit or get off the pot moment. There are cowards that work with guns in their hands. There's cowards in the SEAL teams. There's cowards in the Marines. There's cowards in the Army. There's cowards in all service branches. In every fire department and in probably every police organization, not only in the U.S., but on the face of the planet. The job that you have and the tools that you work with do not define you. Your actions do. So in all of the above examples, especially the ones having to do with the U.S. military, it might actually be hard for some people to believe what I'm saying. But I guarantee you, those who come from those communities know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying that it's rampant. I'm saying it exists. And people who live in those environments and work in those environments, it's as clear as day. Some people come to the SEAL teams as a calling. And some people come to the SEAL teams for a resume bullet. Some people want what I like to call the 3 Ps. It's either the power, the prestige, or the perks. These people may wear the same uniform as everybody else, but I personally believe that inside they know the truth about their motivations. It's not discussed much externally, especially in the SEAL teams. And in my opinion, that's because there is a fear of tarnishing the many by the actions of the few. And that sucks to a large degree because it allows people to have a lot of latitude left and right and to do things that they wouldn't normally be able to do, especially inside of the SEAL teams. These problems are generally handled very well inside of the teams while people are on active duty. Outside of that environment, it gets a little squirrely. Like I said before, the two-way range, it's merely a microscope and a spotlight. Nothing more. And I would be very cautious putting too much weight on it. And I'll give you an example as to why. As a hypothetical, let us take the most decorated soldier in the history of the U.S., or we'll go deeper into something I'm a little bit more familiar with. Let's take the most decorated SEAL in the history of the SEAL teams, which I don't know who it is, and I don't want anybody to go research this. This is purely a hypothetical example. What if that person who received every military award and accolade for their actions in a combat environment, at the end of their service, what if their personal life is in complete shambles? What if their family is destroyed, or they're on their second or third or fourth family? What if they're a raging alcoholic? What if that individual is financially irresponsible and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt with no plan to pay off that debt? What if that individual doesn't know their kids, and their kids of that individual have suffered because they haven't had a father figure for their entire life? Is that person a hero? Is that person a good SEAL? Is that person brave? Or is that person a coward? If you were to ask me to answer that question, I would tell you that that person had displayed amazing acts of heroism and bravery, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, your job title, the tools that you use to do that job, and the rewards that you might get from doing your job don't define you. Your actions do, not just in your job, but in everyday life. So no, I wouldn't call that person a hero. I'd call that person a coward. They did amazing things in the pursuit of an occupation, and terrible things in the pursuit of being a human being. And you can't take one without the other. So that's my take on bravery and cowardice. And I actually didn't really define cowardice. But again, if bravery is, doing the right thing, regardless of the situation happening and the outside influences, I'm going to call cowardice the unwillingness or inability to do exactly that, just for clarity. So let's dig in here now a little bit onto the actual question about the ethics, now that I've spouted off for probably, 10 minutes on a issue that just seems to irritate me. So let's talk a little bit about ethical versus unethical in regards to hunting. Well, actually, let's just start in general. So what are ethics to begin with? I looked it up, and the definition that I resonated with the most was ethics are moral principles that govern a person's behavior. Now, I wanted to dig into that a little bit more, and I wanted to understand a definition of principles. And the definition that I found that I liked the most was a fundamental source or basis of something. So your principles are going to be driven largely by your information source. And when I talk to people, or when people talk to me about ethics, or ask me about ethics, I generally, the first thing that I do is ask them about what they feel and then why. And then I ask them about their experience level and where they're getting their information. And that's obviously difficult given this format where I don't know who listens to this, but if you're listening into it, it's tough to do a two-way conversation. So if you were sitting across from me or somebody was sitting across from me and we were discussing the ethics of hunting, my first questions would be, tell me about your own experience. Tell me about, if you have no experience in hunting, which is totally fine, tell me about your information. Where did you get it from? Is it something that you have researched on your own? Is it something that is just a deeply held personal belief, something that you have just felt this way for as long as you can remember? Is it something that somebody said to you that you've kind of latched onto? Is it based in fact or emotion? That's really what I'm trying to figure out when I ask those questions. And if you know anything about me, you'll know that I don't care what people believe. I'm grateful that we live in a place where you can believe whatever you want to. So I'm asking those questions not in an attempt to get a value judgment of the individual, or it's not a value of the individual or the character. It's a question based of understanding who it is that I'm talking to. I want to understand the other person's perspective. From my perspective, when people ask me why I hunt, there's many reasons that I will pursue this for the rest of my life. Probably first and foremost is that I absolutely love the outdoors, and hunting is another vehicle for me to get out there and spend more time outdoors, especially with my kids, which is an opportunity that I'm going to take at every avenue it presents itself. And I also, for a long time, inherently felt like something was wrong when I would go to the grocery store and I would stand in the meat aisle and stare at endless choices and what seemed to be endless volume. Something just didn't seem right about it. Now, I'll never try to convince anyone to do the things that I do. Believe me, I have how would I describe this, or how has it been described to me? I have an odd choice in hobbies, and I can't really argue that. But I'm just trying to live my life, and I'm more than happy letting other people live their life the way they want to. So when it comes to hunting and the ethics of it, if you don't want to hunt, don't hunt. If you are against eating meat, then by all means, don't eat meat. My irritation and my objection, it begins when a belief, a personal belief by somebody else, morphs into a position of moral superiority. I don't care what people believe, but don't make a character judgment of your position versus mine or anybody else's because you think you have the moral high ground. All right? Stop being so goddamn selfish. Stop thinking that you are so smart and so important that you have the answers to how everyone should live their life. Live your life. So from an outside perspective, when I see people talking about hunting and the ethics of hunting, I say from an outside perspective. What I should probably say is from a new perspective, or a very new perspective. It seems to me like the discussion and argument around ethics boils down to killing. And there are, from what I can tell, three pools. There's the pool that wants no killing whatsoever, and they have chosen to live their life based on those beliefs. Awesome. There are those that exercise the ostrich defense, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then there are those that want to experience the full spectrum. And by that I mean from hunting and gathering all the way to having food on your plate and providing for your family. So three completely different perspectives, and what I find are three completely different opinions on the ethics of hunting. If you're going to talk about hunting and it boils down to killing, I think we have to start with the premise that human beings have potentially, and that's probably the wrong word to use, likely the right word to use would be absolutely, have irrevocably damaged the world that we live in. And my point in saying that is, regardless of your stance on killing, I don't really think anybody's hands are clean. unless somehow you have figured out a way to be completely self-sustained with zero impact, not only on the macro environment, but also the micro environment. And I'm talking you are getting your power from solar or wind. You don't have a vehicle. You don't have a cell phone. You essentially have no contact with the modern world, and you provide for yourself. I don't know how many people are willing to do that. And again, I'll probably repeat this quite a bit throughout the podcast. I don't have any judgment of how you live your life. I just want to be honest when we sit down and we talk about something. So for those who don't agree with killing of any type, if you're not living your life like this scenario that I just listed out above, with complete and utter isolation from the modern world where you're self-sustained and you're providing for yourself, things are dying to support your way of life. Even people who have no desire to eat meat, which again, no problem with that whatsoever, animals are dying to support your way of life. And if you are any way associated with factory farming on the agricultural side of the house, do a little bit of research into the number of animals that die from pesticides or herbicides, or even more importantly, the machine equipment, right? The mechanisms that support agriculture. Thousands of animals per year, rabbits, animals that nest in the fields, whether it be corn or wheat or whatever it may be, those massive mechanisms that take it from the field and start the processing journey to get it to a shelf in a food store, they take the lives of countless animals along the way. So are you really against killing? Or are you just against killing animals that you feel are important or that you care about? It's a very interesting sliding scale of ethics. And in my opinion, ethics shouldn't be on a slide rule. So the second group, those who exercise the ostrich defense. These I have generally found to be are individuals. They have no issue eating meat, but they are against or they do not agree with hunting for the reasons that I gave in the initial question. They think it's unfair, cowardly, or there's no need to do it for wild animals. The reason I call this group the group exercising the ostrich defense is because if you're eating meat, fish or poultry or beef or pork, and you haven't taken the time to research and understand where it comes from, but you make a moral argument against hunting, you have your head in the sand, just like an ostrich. Think about this for a second. Outsourcing your killing does not make your hands clean. Outsourcing killing while choosing to remain ignorant does not make you morally superior. It makes you a coward. Which of these is more ethical in your opinion? Educating yourself or claiming ignorance? And to be clear, I have zero issue with people who eat meat but have no desire to hunt. That is not a problem that I have. What I have a problem with are those individuals that have that belief but don't take the time to know and understand the impact and the cost of what it takes to provide for them. I'm looking at my iPhone right now, and this thing likely has multiples of the computing power of the first spacecraft that were ever launched into orbit. My point in saying that is, whether you're an iPhone dude or a Droid person, whatever it is, there's no lack of portals to information. And I understand why people don't take the time to research many of the things that they believe to be true. And that's because it's easier to stick your head in the sand. And by sticking your head in the sand, it's much easier to point fingers. And that's what irritates me about this ostrich defense, because I see it everywhere. And it's very concerning to me. I see the same type of mentality when it comes to judgment of police. I see it, especially when I see it, the judgment of police. Well, people will sit there and they'll judge the training and call it inadequate. They'll judge the actions and call them irresponsible with no understanding and no experience of that training, having never been in a use and force environment or sought out a use of force simulator to give themselves a better understanding of how hard it is to make critical decisions in time-compressed environments when people's lives are on the line. That doesn't stop them from pointing fingers. I see it in people's political views. I see it in people's belief of America's position in the world and how we are viewed, both politically and from a military action perspective. And it bugs me because I, again, am thankful that people can believe whatever they want to believe and live their life however they want to live their life. But we would be far better served if individuals developed some breadth and depth to their knowledge and to their beliefs. Believe whatever you want, but be a responsible human being and educate yourself. Don't just look for the information that confirms what you believe and surround yourself with people who parrot the same things. Look at both sides of an issue. If I have something that I believe in personally, I will go and seek out conversations with people that have opposite opinions of my own, not in an attempt to try to change their mind, but in an attempt to understand their position and then understand how that fits into my own belief structure. Being passionate about your beliefs, absent knowledge, and then screaming what you believe at the top of your lungs, whether that be on social media or commenting on whatever it may be on other people's stuff, that doesn't make you right. It just makes you an asshole. Take the time to educate yourself, which I'm glad this question came up. That's exactly what I tried to do before I sat down to record this podcast. You have all the tools you could possibly need for limitless information. Please, I'm begging you, use them for something good. And along those lines, I sat down before, or as I was taking notes on what I wanted to talk about on the podcast, and I did a little bit of research on what it actually takes to sustain the meat industry in North America. And I found that the numbers actually shocked me a little bit, and I wanted to share them with people. Some statistics I was able to find, just the meat industry in general. And, I didn't research this for 30 hours. I did a peripheral search and was able to find numbers that were very similar in nature. And even if these numbers are 10 to 20% off, to me, they were startling. So here's what I was able to find. In 2015, 2,000 million cattle, chicken, ducks, hogs, sheep, lambs, and turkeys were killed to feed North America. That number in and of itself is huge, and as I dug in a little bit further, if you were listening to the categories that I listed off, one that's obviously missing is fish, or animals that come from the sea. And another thing that's missing is how much we import from other countries. So in 2009, there was a more complete total. 8.3 billion land animals, and the delta between that 2 and the 8.3 is those imports and exports. So 8.3 billion land animals and 51 billion sea animals were killed for a total of 59 billion animals to support the meat industry, not in the world, but in North America, and specifically the United States. Those numbers were pretty shocking to me, and what shocks me more, and what I would hope that everybody would take the time to do who does consume meat, and if you do, cool, and if you don't, cool. But if you do consume meat, and you do consume meat that is sourced from a grocery store, which the vast majority of people source their meat from those locations, do some research on what it actually takes to get it from the natural environment, or I'm going to actually rephrase that, from the environment that the animal lives to being wrapped in your grocery store. Do a little bit of research on the conditions that those animals live in. Do some research on the feed that they are given. The very often unnatural, not that it's necessarily artificial, it's not what they would be eating in their natural habitat, but so that's force-fed to them, largely for the purpose of increasing their size and fattiness for consumption. do a little bit of research on the drugs that these animals are given to counteract the effects of the feed and what happens when you force feed animals food that is not natural to them. And just do a little bit of research into the animal health, the conditions, the health, the feed, and the drugs. Those 4 things right there. It may just change your perception. It may just change your fundamental source of information, right? Those principles that drive your ethics. It did for me. It 100% did for me. Before I talk about the third group of individuals in the ethical hunting conversation, I have to address the comment that was in the question talking about the fairness of hunting. All I can say, if your argument against hunting is that it's not fair, all I can really say is that the view of the world is better and your vision will improve exponentially when you pull your head out of your ass. Nothing, I repeat, nothing in the world is fair. Is it fair that we were born into a first world country versus a third, and we have all of the benefits of those countries as opposed to trying to struggle our way out of crippling poverty? Are the economic, educational, and health conditions throughout the world fair? Is it fair to raise an animal in captivity and force feed it an unnatural diet, artificially fatten it for consumption, then put it in an assembly line where it gets a nail in the head? Is that fair? Is business fair? Are the differences between human beings, whether they are psychological, physiological, are the capabilities, one person has more athletic prowess than another, whereas another one has a different level of IQ. Is that fair? Is Alzheimer's fair? How about dementia? The fair is a place where you have cotton candy and the coin toss. If you're expecting it from the world, you're going to get your teeth kicked in. On to the third group, and I'll call these those who, again, want to experience the full spectrum of hunting, from hunting in the wild to food on your plate. And I'm going to reinforce this again. I make no character or value judgment on which one of these groups that you are in. All I ask is that you are objective, educated, and honest about your position and have an understanding of where your beliefs come from before you start screaming them to other people. So when it comes to hunting and those who choose to hunt, I wish, first off, that everybody who wanted the opportunity to hunt would get it. Many people I know will never get that opportunity. That's not the reality. There's time constraints. There's a cost of the equipment. There's sourcing the equipment in general. The geography, if you live in New York City, it might be a little bit more difficult than where I live. And I understand that. This journey for me started with the desire to not purchase meat from a factory farming environment. That was a personal decision that I made, and I happened to live in a place, or I happened to move to a place, where the ability to do that is a reality. If I'm successful in the hunting that I want to do, it is very likely and very possible that I can, at least from a financial perspective, detach myself from that factory farming. And so what I've personally experienced, and again, like I said, the 3 groups of individuals talking about this, the argument or discussion generally boils down to the moment of killing or the fairness of the killing. What I've found personally is that, yeah, it's exciting to get to that point, but the entire experience is much, much more powerful, and it lasts far beyond the hunt itself. For me, it was a lifestyle choice, and it is a lifestyle choice. Elk season is already over here in Montana, but I'm already thinking about this year. I almost said next year, but I remember we're into 2018. And I'm already training for the 2018 season. The workouts I do, the training I'm doing, my diet, and my goal, it all has a purpose. And my goal is to be in an optimal position for hunting season so I can arrive at that critical moment, that moment where this argument draws its origin, and I can think clearly, and I can make ethical decisions. Because the last thing that I want to do is something that is unethical. I do not want to wound an animal. I do not want to make a decision that would cause an animal to suffer. And I don't want to make a mistake. I think that's still my biggest fear, is making a mistake in a moment that counts. But that's what drives me. I eat meat, but I don't expect anybody else to. I just don't want to participate in factory farming. In my freezer in the garage, I have my elk and deer meat from 2017. And every time I open that freezer, it's kind of like a journey back to everything that came before the hunt and everything that went into the hunt. And when I pull, there's a variety of different, there's some steaks in there and ground elk meat, all sorts of stuff. But regardless of which type of meat I pull out of there, I know exactly where it came from. I know exactly what that animal ate. I personally carried that animal, when we're talking about the elk, with the help of others. I did not do that by myself. But I carried it out and took it to the meat processor myself, and it's now feeding a family of 5. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's actually the most delicious meat that my kids have ever eaten. They love it. And every time that I make something for them, they remark on how good it tastes. Now, my wife, she's not really into meat right now. So we have a little bit of a different fare going on at the house, and my kids are enjoying that animal that took an insane amount of effort to be able to bring back to the house, and my wife is not. And we are existing in a very symbiotic nature right here in my own house. We have 2 categories of people when it comes to not necessarily killing, but the desire to eat meat. So that's been my journey. Now, do all hunters take the approach that I do? No, of course they don't. There are, of course, people out there who absolutely define the worst stereotypes of hunters. But I don't think that the few should be colored by the many. And as far as my own personal experience, it is one of the most ethical groups I've ever been exposed to in the woods or out of them. And I know that there are still some people, much like the person who asked this question, who are unsure of where they stand. Because they say they had a soft, even in the question it said, I have a soft spot for animals. The reality is, I do too. I love animals. And I'll say it again. If it sounds like it's something that you're not comfortable with, don't do it. If the description of the meat industry and the research that you do drives you away from wanting to be involved with factory farming of any kind, or you no longer want to be involved in that process, do the best you can to source your meat, if you choose to eat meat, from places that are more ethical, whether that be and again, not everybody's going to have access to this, and that's okay. But family farms or something local where you can go and actually get an experience of where this animal is coming from, and it's not a blind option with saran wrap and a plastic label on it at the grocery store. If you're unsure as to whether or not you think you can hunt or you could kill an animal, my personal recommendation would be get out there and try it. Not get out there and try to kill an animal, but get out there and try to get yourself into a situation or an environment where it's possible. No one's going to be able to make you pull the trigger, so you can back down at any time. But at the very least, you'll have answered that question for yourself, and I think you'll likely have learned something about yourself along the way and in the process. Live your life however you want to live it, but just please don't do it with your head in the sand. And then I'll close out by saying this. Be very thankful that you have the opportunity to make the choices that you do. Because many people are going to live their entire lives without having the luxury to choose which category of those 3 individuals that they want to be in. They're in the category that they were born into, and they spend the rest of their life trying to claw their way out of it. And that's all I got. Thanks, everybody. That's episode 26. The feedback you guys are providing is awesome. Appreciate it. The reviews on iTunes, like I've always said, good, bad, ugly. Send whatever you got. Give me any feedback that you guys have on this podcast. You can reach out via there's a contact button on the podcast itself. You can reach out to me on social media. I do my best to get back to every single message. If you think I could be doing something better, hit me up with it. I'm doing this podcast for myself, but it's a learning process, and it largely is a self-discovery process for myself. And if you got improvements or suggestions, shoot them my way. I'll take it on board, and if it's something that I can do to make it better, I absolutely will. What else? Yes, the Smoke Jumper shirt came out. It's probably illegal to say it's the best shirt ever, but it is the best shirt ever. And if you want to get one, I would say do it within the next day or two, because at the rate that they're selling, they're going to be gone, and then it takes me a couple weeks to resource it. So if you're into that kind of thing, grab one. If you're not into that kind of thing, don't grab one. And that's it. I will see you guys next week.